Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Pennsylvania Wine Society virtual wine tastings. And today, we will have Kevin Ostrowski. I was just chatting with Gary. Sorry about that. We will have Kevin Ostrowski presenting part 2 of his series of French wine tours. Today, we will be looking at Bordeaux and the Loire Valley. Want to let you know that we'll have a chat session at the end of this where you can ask all the questions you want. But in the meantime, if you would, just keep your microphones muted and use the chat facility liberally. I will try to interject with your comments when and where I can. And also, this episode is being recorded. If you have an aversion to that, please do what you need to do now. With that, Kevin, if you want to take control and go and proceed.
Good, thanks, Marty. Again, most of you have been through at least one of my other presentations, and you're familiar with me a little bit. Let's just say I've been busy since my retirement, and I've enjoyed studying wine. Marty, did you want to cover anything here, or have you sufficiently detailed everything?
Well, I've mentioned where this is being conducted on behalf of the Pennsylvania Wine Society. I'll have a little revenue portion at the end where we have a little commercial where we'll chat more about that. During which I will urge you to check out our website if you aren't already a member and learn more about us. In the meantime, I'm ready to learn more about French wines.
Excellent, Marty. Thank you. I'll proceed then. Just an update for everyone. Again, I've talked about it before. I don't have much more in the way of new news or information, but as most of you perhaps know, Bordeaux as well was affected by the frost this past spring. Again, the estimated losses overall have been about 3 billion euro, with the French government offering up about 1 billion in recovery for the efforts of the vignerons and the recovery of the vineyards. The images here are simply some hay bales that have been staged next to the vineyards at the time. These would have been lit on fire in order to generate some warmth for the vineyards. And also, I talked last time about the use of this, for lack of a better word, it's called stop gel, but at the same time, it's more like a sterno product, which again, you can see being used in the vineyards in the lower right-hand corner, again, in an attempt to generate some heat in the vineyards. Again, the losses have yet to be assessed other than a total estimate. So stand by for more news out of France. And again, that's where Bordeaux, Burgundy, the Rhone Valley, many, many other places have been affected by the frost this year. These are the two regions of today's discussion. We're going to talk about more towards the northern end of France, the Loire Valley, and one of the other major rivers in France, the longest river, the Loire River, and also the Bordeaux region, which will include three other major rivers in France. So if there's any general theme that we've been following, we've been following along the rivers, the major rivers of France. Just as a quick review, again, this was in the last presentation in part 1, but France overall rates 3rd in vineyard acres, 2nd in production, 2nd in the consumption of wine, with the USA holding its only number 1 spot in terms of consumption. France is number 3 in exports and number 4 with imports. Much of this data may change based on the pandemic this past year, but at the time this snapshot was taken, that's the current rankings for not only France, but on the right-hand side of the page, I included where we stand relative to the worldwide rankings. Again, another review slide, just a quickie on French wine labeling. This system has been around since 1935. At the bottom of the pyramid is the vin de table, or the table wine. And then going up the pyramid, we have the IGP, or simply geographical indications. And then depending on whether or not the vigneron is following the French rules or the European Union rules, it would be labeled as AOC or AOP wines. Again, this is also a familiar slide. However, it's been modified a little bit. I mentioned last time how our third president, Thomas Jefferson, who had become the minister plenipotentiary for France under George Washington, who was president at the time, he actually succeeded Benjamin Franklin as the minister to France in 1785. A Francophile, he loved France. He was very much in favor of everything French. Some examples, he certainly favored Bordeaux wine. At the time, it would have been called Claret, kind of a field blend of white and red grapes, making a relatively light-bodied red wine. Sometimes we would probably look at it more as a heavy rosé. Also, he liked the wine specifically of Haut-Brion and Chateau d'Yquem, both of which we'll talk about through the course of this presentation. Another item is he had taken Sally Hemings' brother, and again, we're not going to go to that particular story, but he did take Sally Hemings' brother, James, over to France and had him trained in French cuisine so that the president could enjoy French cuisine back home. In the lower right-hand corner, there is a plaque which is currently posted on the building which used to house the U.S. consulate in Bordeaux, and it simply recognizes Thomas Jefferson as a symbol of friendship between France and America. And again, that plaque, I believe, is still on the building, but again, it is a tribute to our third president. Also, on the left-hand side of the page, we're going to talk about that particular bottle of wine that is pictured with the president, the 1787 Lafite. And we'll get to that a little bit later when we get into Bordeaux, but just keep that in mind for now. If you want to read more about the president and his travels in France and his love of wine, again, you can pick up the book by John Hallman, Thomas Jefferson on Wine. Again, we'll come back to our third president a little bit later, but that's kind of an intro that we do have a connection here to this particular, to French wine. Getting to France, again, we're going to travel from our country, most likely New York, to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. And from there, we can either do the train or rent a car. I did so well on my last trip to France. You see, I got an upgrade there to a little red convertible this time. So that's what we'll take around France on this particular trip. Our first stop was going to be in the Loire Valley. Again, a World Heritage Site for a section of the Loire Valley between Suisse-sur-Loire and the Chalon region. That region would contain 32 of the famous chateaus in the Loire Valley, but it is considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is a broad map of the Loire Valley wine regions. Again, the Loire River is the longest river in France, a total length of almost 630 miles, and this whole valley is referred to as the cradle of the French. The Loire River begins in the central part of France in the Massif Central Mountains, which are pictured there on the right, and it flows westward towards the Atlantic Ocean, where it dumps out into the Atlantic Ocean in the Pi Nantais. A little bit of backstory and history on the Loire Valley. Of course, the Romans play their part in the 1st century under Julius Caesar. In the 4th century, we see the rise of Christianity, where Saint Martin of Tours will take a role in our wine business. In the 6th century, Frankish King Clovis brings all of France together, and under him is the construct of many fortifications along the Loire River. As you might guess, because it is a river that penetrates deep into France, it was visited by many raiding entities such as the Vikings, the Normans, the English, to mention a few. So these fortifications along the river will play into the Loire Valley as time goes on. In the 12th century, Eleanor of Aquitaine marries the Duke of Normandy, and that's when French wine becomes extremely popular in England. In the 15th century, during the 100 Years' War, Joan of Arc is going to frequent the area, the Loire Valley, in its battles to become a free and independent France. And in the 16th century, we see the rise of the Renaissance. And it's at this time when those fortresses get converted by the rich and famous into the chateaus that we know of today. Leonardo da Vinci is actually spending his last days in one of those chateaus, and we will talk about that here in a little while. Here are some of the chateaus. Again, these would have all been former fortresses that had been converted to chateaus. Essentially, they were the summer homes of the rich and the famous during the Renaissance. The star next to the Chateau de Chenonceau is just to remind me that that particular chateau, which spans the entire length, or not the entire length, the entire width of the Cher River, one of the tributaries of the Loire Valley, of the Loire River. That is the second most visited house or chateau in France, second only to the palace at Versailles. And again, if you wish, you can certainly tour that if you're in the area. But if, all things aside, if we wish to experience the chateaus of France, we can certainly do so. Here is a handful of chateaus that have now been converted into basically a hotel or a bed and breakfast. So if you wish, you can certainly rent a room at one of the chateaus in the Loire Valley for the true chateau experience. In the lower left-hand corner, I don't know if any of you have actually watched the program, but currently on HGTV, there is a show about the refurbishment of a chateau in the Loire Valley. The title of the show is Escape to the Chateau. Rather fascinating, but it gives you a glimpse as to the insides of the buildings and also the grounds. So just something to look out for if you're looking for something fun on TV. Getting into the geography and the climate of the Loire Valley. Again, we're up in the northern part of France where it obviously might be a bit cooler. As we move closer to the west and to the ocean in the area known as the Nantes, we are near the ocean with a cool maritime climate. We have warm summers, we have cool winters, but the humidity is high, as you might expect, near the ocean. And because of the ocean weather, we're going to see increased precipitation near the ocean. As you move from west to east, the maritime influence decreases. We get a little bit more sunlight, but the humidity remains relatively high. And for us in the wine business, that means an increase in the amount of grapes affected by botrytis. And again, you'll see how that plays into the wine styles when we get into the Anjou-Saumur regions. Farthest to the east is called the Upper Loire or the Loire Centrale. This now has a continental climate. It does get a little bit of sea breeze, but overall you can see how the ocean to the west and the mountains to the east are going to influence the climates in these particular regions. The soils of the Loire are going to be dominated by tuffeau, a famous soil in that part of the valley. It's this tuffeau soil which was responsible for the construct of those chateaus. There you can see a wall of one of the chateaus built out of this limestone that contains a little bit of chalk and sand, very fine grained, not very dense, but again, a good building material nonetheless. So that's what you'll see in most of the vineyards. Early in prehistoric times, the troglodytes, the prehistoric people known as the troglodytes, and yes, there were peoples known as the troglodytes, they used the tuffeau caves or the cliff sides as homes. And if you really wish to, there are several of these troglodyte homes that have converted into bed and breakfasts and hotels as well. You can seek one of those out and sleep within the boundaries of the tuffeau soil. The Loire Valley is responsible for more white wine than any other French region. It is second only to Champagne in the production of sparkling wine. Its signature white grapes include Melon de Bourgogne, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, Chenin Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc. The classic red grape of the area, the superstar grape, is Cab Franc, which locally is referred to as Breton. There's some pictures of the grapes. It's the Chenin Blanc grape, by the way, that gets picked up, and some clippings are given to Jan van Riebeek of the Dutch East India Company. And it's Jan that takes those clippings and those grapes to South Africa, where that Chenin Blanc becomes known as Steen. And it's in 1659 that we see the first wines out of South Africa. The winter of 1709 was also significant with regards to the grape Melon de Bourgogne. In 1709, they had 3 months of extreme cold weather. It was the coldest winter in the last 500 years of recorded weather. The war between England and France was put on hold because it was too cold. And in other parts of that region, as you can see, there was stories of people ice skating on the Venice canals, people crossing the Baltic Sea on horseback because the sea would have been frozen. Of course, not much protection from the cold. Thousands of people would have perished. And again, there's stories of church bells breaking because of the extreme cold and wine that was frozen in the bottles. It was after this winter of 1709 that King Louis XIV, the Sun King, put out an edict that no other grape should be grown in this region other than Melon de Bourgogne, since it was certainly more cold hardy than the other varieties that were lost to the weather. The Loire Valley is also known as the Garden of France. Some of the more popular produce in the area, of course, is the d'Anjou pears, apples, cherries, grapes, of course, for wine, but also table grapes, strawberries, asparagus, black currants, and also saffron. The first region we're going to visit is the farthest west on the coast. It's the Pays Nantais. The upper map gives you a broad view of where we're located, and the detailed map shows you all of the AOCs in the Pays Nantais. About 75% of the wines made in this region are from the grape Melon de Bourgogne. This grape, by the way, picked up its name because it was believed to have originated in Burgundy. So the translation here would be Melon de Bourgogne, with the word melon referring to what apparently was a musky aroma of the grape at the time. As indicated by the stars on the map, if any of those AOCs have the word muscadet in the title, those particular AOCs are approved for the melon grape only. So that's the only types of wines you will get out of those 3 regions. The wine itself is made in 3 different styles. You have a neutral still wine with some high acidity. Most of the wine, though, is left for a certain amount of time on its lees. The lees aging and the degradation of the yeast inside the wine as it ages, it gives the wine a little bit more body and some mouthfeel. And for that reason, we see a lot of wines coming out of this region with some lees aging. In addition, some of the wines might have a slight sparkle to them. This is the Pays Nantais, and that's where we're going to begin our journey. Here's a couple of wines. Again, you can see in the title that they specifically highlight the fact that they are sur lie aged. In this case, the one on the left, the Chérot Car, is aged on the lees for 6 to 9 months in concrete, again, trying to improve the body and the mouthfeel to couple with the high acidity. And the wine on the right, I have tried before, again, a very pleasant wine, a sur lie aged wine. This is called a Muscadet Sève et Menthe, mainly because this wine is grown on the 2 tributaries of the Loire River, the Sève River and the Main or Mine River. Both wines are 100% Melon de Bourgogne. This is another wine I wanted to highlight only because of its certification as a biodynamic winery, and it gave me the opportunity to highlight it as one of the earliest biodynamic vineyards in the Loire Valley. Domaine de la Cue would produce a Muscadet Sauvignon called Orthonice, which is a reference to the soil in which it is grown. You can see that it's concrete aged, it's 100% certified biodynamic, and the biodynamic certification comes from the Demeter International Organization, which had been established by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s. The farm or the vineyard would be required to renew their certification on an annual basis. And if you've studied about biodynamic wines before, you know that this is the group that plants their vineyards by the moons and the stars movements through the sky. They also treat their vineyards with preparations such as cow horns filled with manure buried at a certain time of the year. Demeter was actually named after the Greek goddess of the harvest and agriculture, and there's a photograph there of a statue of the Greek god of the harvest, Demeter. Here in our country, we have a Demeter USA, and again, there's not many vineyards that are certified Demeter biodynamic, but that number increases as the years go on. Moving over to our next region, Anjou-Saumur. This is now we're moving to the east where we get a little less influenced by the ocean. It is still a cool continental climate, but we now continue to have some maritime influence. Some of that sea breeze carries over. The grapes of the Anjou-Saumur include a Cab Franc, a Cab Sauv, some Gamay as well. The white wine now shifts from the Muscadet Melon de Bourgogne to the Chenin Blanc grape, becomes the superstar in this particular region, where if the Chenin is made into a sparkling wine, it's called a Mousseau. And if it has just a little bit of sparkle, it's called a petulant wine. And again, we've heard that phrase before. For those of you that were on my rosé presentation, this is the region that's making the 3 different rosés that we spoke about in that presentation. The Rosé d'Anjou, which is a little off dry, made primarily of the Groliot grape. Cabernet d'Anjou, which is a little bit sweeter, and a Rosé de Loire, which is a dry wine. So there's 3 different rosé types coming out of the Anjou-Saumur. The wines I really wanted to highlight here begin with the Sauvignon, which is again shown on the map there, where that's located, right on the Loire River. Sauvignon is a 100% Chenin Blanc grape. There's just one example of it that is available in our state store. And in 1996, a book written by Jacqueline Friedrich highlighted the Sauvignon wine as the most cerebral wine in the world. And it has kind of kept that reputation for some reason. So with that, again, the Sauvignon is a delicious wine. Some tasting notes include honey kind of tones with some citrus and some other, in addition to some stone fruits, some peaches and apples. But it also has some high acid, again, because of the cooler weather. You can find sweet versions with residual sugars up to 8 grams per liter, but there's an example of a Sauvignon wine. And that, by the way, is a picture of the vineyards of Domaine Petite Maîtrise, the producer of this particular wine. Another popular style of wine comes from the regions that are in between the Léon River and the Loire River. As I mentioned when we were talking about the climate of the area, this is one of the regions where botrytis becomes a key player. Botrytis, also called a gray mold, is responsible for basically dehydrating the grapes. The grapes become raisinated, which concentrates the sugar within the grapes. The grapes are pressed, of course, the sugar concentration being very high, and the subsequent juice is turned into a very sweet wine. And there are 3 different AOCs that are known for this sweet wine made out of 100% Chenin Blanc. That's Court de Chaume, the Coteau du Léon, and the Bonnezeau AOCs, are all known for a sweet wine made from Chenin Blanc. Here's just one example. It's, again, you can see the price recognizes the difficulty in working with the concentrated sugar juice. This is a half bottle, 375 milliliters, and at about $40. Again, a very delicious dessert wine. And one of the highlighted pairings of this particular wine is a local regional specialty, a tartane, which is basically an apple upside down tart that was created by Stephanie and Carolyn Tatan at the Hotel Tatan, which they operated in that particular area. They invented this dessert. It caught on to this day. It's popular, and it would go very, very well with a Court de Chaume, very sweet wine, sweet dessert wine. Moving on, we get into the region known as Touraine, where we're going to highlight two AOCs, two signature AOCs, the first being Vouvray and the second one being Chinon. First of all, if you happen to be in the area, this is an area where the Renaissance became very, very big. And this is where King Francis at the time in the 1500s invited Leonardo da Vinci to come live with him and be his artist in residence. The Leonardo da Vinci stayed at the Clos Lucé, which is pictured there on the upper portion of the image. And he is buried in the chapel of Saint Hubert. And there you can certainly visit the tomb of Leonardo da Vinci located in the chapel. But this would have been at the height of the Renaissance, and this is where Leonardo da Vinci would have spent his last days. That chapel and Leonardo is in the city of Amboise, which is in the central part, not too far from the main city of Tours. So we're going to look at two AOCs, Vouvray and Chinon. The first wine of Vouvray, this is 100% Chenin Blanc, where locally it's called Pinot de Loire. This is in reference to the shape of the cluster. Pinot, of course, translates into pine. And again, the shape reminded people of a pine cone or a pine cone shape. So therefore, it picked up the name Pinot de Loire. There's two different styles here at Barton and Goustier, and their vineyard and their pictures are posted there for your viewing pleasure. This would be a dry wine, a Vouvray, but it can be sweet. And you can also find some sparkling styles, which I've shown on the right. There is a 100% Chenin traditional method from Jayon, and that is a Vouvray sparkling wine. By the way, this Chenin Blanc was believed to be brought to the area from Burgundy by Saint Martin of Tours. And if you're in the area, you can go to Tours and visit the Basilica of Saint Martin, where his tomb can be found as well. But again, he plays into the wine world because it's believed that Saint Martin of Tours was the saint that had brought Chenin Blanc to the Loire Valley. Incidentally, he is always pictured, shown there in the lower right-hand corner. He is taking his sword and he is actually cutting his own coat into two pieces because, as the legend goes, Saint Martin of Tours found a beggar on the side of the road that did not have any clothing, and Saint Martin cut his own coat in half to give to the beggar. And from that day forward, Saint Martin is always pictured sharing his clothing with beggars. The other popular wine in this particular area is Chinon. And Chinon is very famous for its production of wine made from Cabernet Franc. So this is all pretty much a dry red wine. This particular style that Domaine René Couy is 100% Cab Franc. It is fermented in stainless, so you do not get a lot of oak influence, but it does get 9 months of bottle aging. Chinon is an excellent, excellent version. I happen to be a big fan of Cab Franc. This particular wine is fuller bodied, but it's elegant, it's fruity and acidic. Some of the classic descriptors for Chinon include pencil lead and also some of that bell pepper, which is actually some of the pyrazines within the chemicals of the grape. I happen to very much enjoy that particular flavor in wines, so I very much enjoy Chinon for that pencil lead, pyrazine, bell pepper kind of taste characteristic. So again, if you're drinking a Chinon, if you're trying it, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are. But overall, this is a very pleasant Cab Franc, a more cold climate grape. By the way, if you happen to be in Chinon itself, you can visit the Chateau de Chinon, where Joan of Arc met with King Charles VII, and basically requested his permission to go fight for France down in the Battle of Orleans, where Joan of Arc did. She was victorious, but we also know that she suffered an ill-fated burning at the stake because of her faith. So again, you can go visit the castle or the chateau where Joan of Arc was made famous. Here is another Chinon. In this case, we have a barrel-aged version. This one is Les Petites Roches, which translates into little rocks, mainly because it's grown on gravelly soil. These are relatively old vines, 35 years old. It's an organic wine. It's only made with free-run juice. It's aged in barrels for 15 to 18 months, and it does go through some malolactic fermentation. So it's going to have a taste profile that's a little less acidic, at least to the taste, because of the malolactic fermentation. I don't know. I think this is a great bargain. It's a wine. It's highly rated by Wine Spectator, amongst others. But at $20, it's a good bargain for a Chinon. Moving to the farthest west into almost the central part of France, we get into the Upper Loire Valley, or the Center Loire, whereas Sancerre and the Sauvignon Blanc grape become the superstar. In that particular region, Sauvignon Blanc would be referred to as Blanc Fumé, which again translates into white smoke. They're also known for a small amount of Pinot Noir, which would be called Sancerre Rouge if you happen to find any. But again, Pinot Noir and Sancerre Rouge would be the wine in question. Because we're a little bit higher up in elevation and heading into the Massif Central, the soils of the Loire Valley change a little bit. Here we get the Terre Blanche, which is a chalky soil with some clay mixed in, a Cayotte, which is a gravelly soil with primarily limestone as its source, and then the Silex soil, which is probably more popular, at least from a name standpoint, which contains mostly flint sand with some clay, limestone, silica mixed in. So there's 3 different soils that are popular in the central Loire Valley. One example of a Sancerre, Domaine de la Pierre, again, grown on chalky limestone soil, resulting in a crisp acidity and a flinty minerality for this particular wine. In Sancerre, you're required to make your wine out of 100% Sauvignon Blanc, if it is a white wine. And this particular wine is a direct press with some cold settling and fermentation, and some lees aging to give it, again, some of that little, some body and some mouthfeel. Just as an example, you can see how Sauvignon Blanc for this particular vineyard plays a major role, with 38 hectares in the vineyards and only 5 hectares of Pinot Noir. So Sancerre and Sauvignon Blanc are certainly highlighted here at this particular vineyard. Another example is this particular item, Martin Mont d'Homme, a Sancerre, 100% Sauvignon Blanc. These have steep south-facing slopes, which means that the grapes are probably getting a bit more ripe. You'll get a little bit more peach and pineapple as a result of the south-facing slope and the additional ripeness and sunshine. But this particular soil is now a little bit more the Kimmeridgian limestone that we read about in Burgundy as well as the Champagne region. Again, we're getting into that Kimmeridgian soil band that runs all the way up into England. This particular wine uses indigenous yeast, and it's tank fermented and tank aged. Therein is the Pierre Martin, the current winemaker. One of the popular pairings there is a goat cheese from the Sancerre region, known as Croton de Chavignon. I thought it was not only an interesting pairing, but if you look up the French translation for the word croton, it actually translates into that which comes out of the opposite end of the goat, mainly goat dung. So I can only imagine what this cheese might smell like, but again, it must be delicious with the Sancerre. Just simply to highlight another region in this particular part of the Upper Loire or the Central Loire, Pouilly-Fumé, not to be confused with Pouilly-Fuissé out of Burgundy, but Pouilly-Fumé is just across the river from Sancerre. Again, you're going to find there Sauvignon Blanc. You'll find some rosé made from a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir, and also some Sancerre Rouge, which would be 100% Pinot Noir. So there's just some other examples of wines from the region. With regards to food pairings, here are some classic food pairings and some foods that are known in the Loire Valley. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, Cure Nantais is a cow's milk cheese made in the Nantais region. Because it's close to the ocean, as you might guess, oysters, mussels, shrimp, all kinds of seafood become popular. Again, this is all farmland, so you do find a lot of livestock where charcuterie becomes popular. Goat cheese is also a big thing in that particular region. Chèvre would be the generic name for the goat cheese. Mushrooms in the center of the screen, in France known as champignons, are grown in those caves that we talked about, made out of the tuffeau soil, where the mushrooms are grown in what they call the troglodyte gardens. At the bottom of the page, a mixture of pork and pork fat is blended together to make a pâté known as a rillette des tours. And again, salmon would have been a good seafood. Again, the Loire Valley and the Loire River is a estuary. As such, you're going to find salmon moving in and up and down the river. So salmon would be popular. Being close to the seashore, they would be drying out some of the seawater to produce the fleur de sel, which is clearly a French product made from the seawater in the local area. That salt is delicious, by the way. You can sprinkle it on a lot of the good summer produce, and I think you'll very much enjoy that if you find it in the markets. And in the lower left-hand corner, this is a breed of chicken. It's black. It's a black feathered chicken called a Geline de Touraine, which again would go excellent with some of that Sancerre Rouge, I'm sure, or maybe some Muscadet. But that's some of the cuisine of the Loire Valley, and also some suggestions for some good pairings. From the Loire Valley, we move down to Bordeaux. Now, if you're in my red convertible, it's going to take you about three and a half to 5 hours to get into the Bordeaux region. But again, you can enjoy the French countryside along the way. Bordeaux is also considered, the city of Bordeaux also has its own World Heritage Site identified by UNESCO. The actual port of Bordeaux, called the Port of the Moon, located in Bordeaux, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as is some prehistoric cave paintings in that same region in the Vézère Valley. A little background on the Bordeaux region. Of course, it would have been settled, and grapes would have been brought in by the Romans in the 1st century. You can still visit some Roman ruins in Bordeaux. This would have been an amphitheater built by the Romans in the 1st century, the La Palais Gallien. In the 3rd century through the 12th century, you kind of keep track of history by who was invading the area. You have those rowdy teenagers, the Vandals, the Goths, the Franks, the Muslims, the Vikings, and the Normans all moving into that particular region and creating havoc. And again, it kind of depends on what century and what period you're talking about as to who's in charge. At the end of the at the beginning of the 12th century, the House of Poitiers is now in control, and Eleanor of Aquitaine, who is a member of the House of Poitiers, marries the French King Louis VII. She marries his son, who was her guardian while she was a girl. And in 1152, the marriage was annulled, and Eleanor married the Duke of Normandy, who became now the King of England. So again, I think this is a great story for a movie where Eleanor is not only the Queen of France, but now the Queen of England within her lifetime. The popular wines at the time would have been the clarets out of Bordeaux. And this is when Eleanor is married to Henry, that the wines of Bordeaux become very popular in England. And now there's a big wine trade between those two locations. Here is a broad map of the Bordeaux region, and I'll just give you a few seconds to take a look at that, because we're going to talk a little bit about the geography and some of the climate and some of the language that we're going to use while we discuss the Bordeaux region. First up is the rivers of Bordeaux. Bordeaux consists of 3 main rivers. The main river is the Gironde, which is the river that flows from southeast to northwest into the Atlantic Ocean. The Gironde River is actually a combination of 2 additional rivers. In the south is the Garonne, and in the north is the Dordogne. And it's the Garonne and the Dordogne that join together, and the confluence of those 2 rivers creates the Gironde River. So as you're floating down the Gironde River, the main river leading to the Atlantic Ocean, as you flow downstream, looking to your left, that area is generally referred to as the left bank. Looking to your right, that area is referred to as the right bank. And all that space between the 2 rivers, that triangle, is called the Entre deux Mers, translated into between 2 seas, which makes total sense because it's between the Dordogne and the Garonne River. So as we talk about the rest of the presentation, we'll refer to the left bank, the right bank, and the Entre deux Mers when we talk about Bordeaux. Now, for those of us who live where I do, near the Pittsburgh area, this looks like a very familiar picture. In the city of Pittsburgh, of course, I have the Allegheny River and the Monongahela, which forms a confluence at the point in the city of Pittsburgh to form the Ohio River. Again, I think you can see the parallels here. We have 3 rivers that make up the Bordeaux region. And again, for me, it's a good way to remember the different river confluences by the Pittsburgh's 3 rivers. And for those of you that are not Pittsburgh fans, you'll just have to enjoy my little cartoons of the Pittsburgh area. By the way, I did want to highlight the Pittsburgh Turnpike in the upper right-hand corner, which I'm sure is totally covered with construction right about now. One of the significant events that occurs as part of the wine business in Bordeaux, in the 17th century, the Dutch were one of the groups that was transporting wine up and down the coast. As you know, the Dutch East India Company would have run all the way from England, all the way around to the Cape of Good Hope, over into India and back. And of course, wine would have been on their cargo ships. But in order to make more money, the Dutch were actually encouraging the production of more ground in which to produce wine. Well, Bordeaux itself was at the mouth of a river. A lot of that land was swampland, especially around the Medoc, which is on the left bank. So the Dutch looked at that as an opportunity, and the Dutch were actually called in to help drain the swamps in order to produce more vineyard land. They used the methods that were employed by a Dutch engineer, Jan Leeuwater, to create a system of pumps and canals to drain the swamps. And after the swamps were drained, they would have planted reeds, which would have captured more ground and created more soil. And the new property would have been turned into more vineyards, resulting in more wine, which the Dutch could then make more money. So in the 17th century, the Dutch are actually responsible for draining the swamps in the Medoc region to create more vineyard land. Another man-made kind of a influence on the Bordeaux region begins in the 19th century, where again, a lot of this swampland was primarily used for the grazing of sheep and livestock. On the lower right-hand corner there, you can see how the residents of the area needed to walk on stilts in order to get through the muck and the mud of the region. In order to improve the economic development of the area, to reduce erosion and to stabilize the soil, this area known as Gascony was planted with many pine trees known as these maritime pines. Overall, they planted and the trees took off, creating 3,900 square miles of forest made up of these maritime pines. This became known as the Landes Forest, which not only helped stabilize the land and created much more stable properties, but also created a huge ocean windbreak for Bordeaux, which exists to this day. The Landes Forest is located to the west of Bordeaux. There you can see its location, where it is very effective at blocking the cold sea breezes coming off the Gulf Stream, flowing from north to south on the Atlantic Ocean. Another thing I wanted to highlight here is because of all these variations in weather and climate, hot and cold, climate change, not to mention the least of, you end up with various variations in the vintages of the Bordeaux wines. And I think most of you are probably familiar with the vintage charts, which anytime you read about Bordeaux, you always read about what kind of year was it in 2016. Was it warm? Was it cold? Did we get a lot of rain, snow, ice, hail? Regardless, the quality of wines is related to the weather. Well, in the overall scheme of things, again, the lands, forest, and the climate and the rivers all play into the quality of the wines in the vineyards. And that is a big influence in the Bordeaux region. Another thing I wanted to highlight here is because of this vintage variation, some of you may be buying Bordeaux wines en primeur, or I guess loosely translated futures. This is where every spring after the vintage, barrel samples of Bordeaux wines are sent around the world for tastings. Then people can buy these wines in anticipation of their release in probably 2 to 3 years, where you're taking a chance as to whether or not the wines are going to improve with age, whether they're going to be very popular and very expensive, and you can get a good deal on some very good wines buying them on futures. Last year, because of the pandemic, the en primeur tastings had to all occur online by way of Zoom. They shipped out individual samples to some very notable tasters at the time. That lower right-hand picture is James Suckling. I'm sure you've heard that name before, who's going through his Bordeaux en primeur tasting last year. But otherwise, it would be grand events throughout the world, as pictured on the left, where these new Bordeaux wines were being tasted. And again, they are not going to be released for 2 to 3 years, but you have the opportunity to invest in the wineries right now at a lower reduced price. The soils of the Bordeaux are very popular. The left bank is known for its gravel. Gravel consisting of limestone, sand, and clay, but dominantly gravel. On the right bank, The predominant soil is clay, creating a very cool, moisture-absorbing soil with some limestone tossed in. As perhaps most of you know, gravel is a favored soil by the Cabernet Sauvignon grape because of its heat retention and its good drainage. Merlot likes it cool and moist, and therefore it becomes the primary grape of the rate bank. These are all the approved red grapes of the Bordeaux region. Bordeaux, 85% of the planted vineyards in Bordeaux are planted with red grapes. The first most popular grape being Merlot, the second being Cabernet, the third being Cab Franc, and then also tossed in there, you are permitted to use Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Carmenère, all of which are approved Bordeaux grapes. Now, there's another reason why there are so many different grapes planted in Bordeaux. It really comes down to not only tastes and flavor profiles, but it's also an economic decision. Because of the variation in the vintages, one year you might have weather that's very conducive to Cabernet Sauvignon, maybe some high heat, some good ripeness, but maybe not so favored by Merlot. So depending on the vintage, you may or may not have a good crop of Cab or Merlot or Cab Franc, so your blend is going to be adjusted accordingly. So as most vineyards do, they plant a wide variety of grapes and then use whatever is best for that particular vintage. But these are all the grapes, the most popular red grapes of Bordeaux. The white grapes of Bordeaux, which would be making what is now known as white Bordeaux wines, the number 4 planted grape in the region is Semillon, and the number 5 grape is Sauvignon Blanc. An interesting development that is really come about because of climate change is the approval of 6 additional grape varieties in Bordeaux. Now, it comes with some restrictions. Oops, I went too fast. It comes with some restrictions, but on March the 30th, 2021, the INAO, the organization that controls the appellations and the approvals of grapes, approved 6 new grapes for the production of the generic appellation wines known as Bordeaux or Bordeaux Supérieur. These 6 grapes, and I'll do my best. I've been tongue twisted with this first grape for like a week now. Aranarnoa is a cross between Tannat and Cab Sauv, a red grape variety. Others I'm sure you're familiar with: Marcelon, Albarino, a white varietal, Castex, Touriga Nacional, popular in Spain and Portugal, and Lilo Ria, a white wine grape. All these 6 grapes are now approved for the production of Bordeaux and Bordeaux Supérieur wines, with the restrictions that the vineyard plant no more than 5% of their vineyard with these particular wines. The grapes also cannot make any more than 10% of any blend. You're also not allowed to mention those grapes on the label. So with that, it's an interesting development that the Bordeaux is recognizing the impact of climate change, because all 6 of these grapes are known to thrive in warmer climates with higher acidity, having a late bud break and a late ripening, and also a disease resistance as a result of the warmer climates. So again, an interesting development in the approval of more grapes for the Bordeaux region. Now, one of the more popular subjects, the Bordeaux classification in 1855. Napoleon III, the president of France at the time, requested a system of classifying and rating wines that were going to be available to all the people who were going to be attending the Paris Exposition of 1855. The system that was determined was going to be based on a chateau's reputation as well as the price of the wine at the time. This was generally seen to be a reflection of the quality of the wine. So if it was expensive and the chateau had a good reputation, it got a good rating. The rating system itself was divided up into 5 segments: first, second, third, fourth, and fifth growths of the wines. Now, here we get into some of the logistics of the Bordeaux classification of 1855. 60 crus or 60 chateaus or growths from the Medoc region and 1 cru from Pessac-Léognan, namely Haut-Brion, were classified in this classification system. 5 of the chateaus were identified as Premier Grand Crus. 14 were Deuxième Crus or second growths. 14 Troisième Crus or third growths. Quatrième Crus, 18, and Cinquième Crus, 18. Altogether, we have 5 different classifications of growths. Now, incidentally, in the Bordeaux, in the original classification of 1855, there were actually 4 Premier Crus, and in 1973, there was 1 change, and the only change that's ever been made to the system, and that is the addition of Chateau Mouton Rothschild, which was elevated from a Deuxième Cru to a Premier Grand Cru Class A. So today there are 5, but in the original classification, there would have been 4. Now, in terms of sweet white wines, there was only 1 Premier Cru Supérieur, and that was Chateau d'Yquem. Other than that, there were 27 crus altogether, but only 1 achieved the highest ranking or the highest level. Here are some of the bottles that are available in our PLCB system for the Bordeaux first growths, or otherwise called Premier Grand Cru Class A's. Chateau Haut-Brion at $650 a bottle. Mouton Rothschild at $750. Chateau Margaux at $800. Chateau Latour, $700 a bottle. And Chateau Lafite Rothschilds at $800 a bottle. All available in our state store system. I'm sure you're going to have to call ahead to reserve them. I did want to highlight one interesting thing. If you notice the labels on these wines, you'll see that Chateau Mouton's Rothschild is slightly different than the others, because in 1924, Chateau Mouton's Rothschild invited world-renowned artists to design its labels. Some more famous artists that I'm familiar with include Andy Warhol, a Pennsylvania artist who designed the 1975 vintage label, Pablo Picasso, the 1973 label, and Salvador Dali, the 1958 label. So some interesting labels out of the Chateau Mouton Rothschild, a Premier Grand Cru wine. Now, getting to our story about the Lafite, again, this would have been Lafite Rothschild's Premier Grand Cru bottle. And in 1985, a discovery was supposedly made in a cellar in Paris. It was several bottles of wine that looked like it was dated as 1787 and looked like it may have been owned by Thomas Jefferson. You can see the images of the bottle there. It has an inscription on the bottles which say TH.J., believed to be the bottles that may have been owned by Thomas Jefferson. These bottles surfaced in 1985. A publisher by the name of Hardy Rodenstock had the bottles identified and auctioned off, as you can guess, for many hundreds of thousands of dollars. In 2005, an art collector and a wine collector, obviously a multimillionaire, Bill Koch, had purchased some of these bottles. He was a US citizen, and Bill wanted to put some of these bottles on display at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The museum, however, hesitated because they wanted to have the bottles validated. They wanted to know that they were truly Thomas Jefferson's bottles from Paris, France. An investigation was launched, and to make a long story short, it was later determined that the bottles were etched with an electric engraver, which made it impossible for it to have been dated 1787, and the wine itself was radiocarbon dated to 1962. So overall, this was just a big counterfeit scheme, and the bottles to this day are well known, and the story of this particular wine can be read about in the book Billionaire's Vinegar that would have been published not too long ago by Benjamin Wallace. So with that, if you're interested in the story of the Jefferson bottles, it makes for an interesting read. The 1855 Bordeaux classification system was so popular that over the years, other classification systems were invented to rate the wines in the Bordeaux region. In 1932, a group of vignerons got together to form an alliance called the Alliance des Crus Bourgeois du Médoc, where all of those properties that were excluded from the 1855 classification got together and formed their own classification system, three of which, the Bourgeois Exceptionnel, Superior, and just the plain old Cru Bourgeois. So that's one system that also exists in the Médoc. In 1953 and again in 59, 16 properties in Graves were rated, and they have their own classification system. In 1954, Saint-Emilion created its own classification system. Premier Cru Class A for 18 different properties. And to make it even more complex, they have a category A and a category B. In 1994, a group of small family-owned estates got together and asked the INAO if they could use the phrase Cru Artisan on their labels, and they were given permission to do so. So in addition to the generic applications of Bordeaux, Bordeaux Superior, and the 1855 classifications, you can see that Bordeaux wine and wine labels can get fairly confusing to read the labels. In our trip around Bordeaux, if you wish, you can drive around different wine trails. Here is a website for the Rue de Valne de Bordeaux, which will show you an automobile traveling route around the Bordeaux region. Our first stop is going to be in the Médoc and also in the Pessac-Léognan, which is all on the left bank. Here is just one example of a wine, and I picked this wine because I think it's unique in the sense that it's a left bank wine, and you would normally expect it to be Cabernet dominant, but here's a left bank wine that's Merlot dominant. Again, it must have been the vintage that year that created this particular blend, but overall, this particular wine is part of that Alliance des Crus Bourgeois du Médoc, and it is classified as a Cru Bourgeois. And again, at the price point of $16, not too bad for a Bordeaux wine. Here's another example from the Pessac-Léognan, a Pessac-Léognan Rouge. Again, here you can see Cabernet dominant wine, a picture of the chateau along the way, and a Wine Spectator 87 as well. Getting into our next region on the right bank, moving across the river, we're going to talk about three different regions. Pomerol, which is right on the river. La Lande de Pomerol, which is the region just behind Pomerol. And the reason we're talking about that is mainly the wines are cheaper and just as good as, well, maybe not just as good, that's a matter of opinion, but good wines from La Lande de Pomerol and Saint-Emilion. One wine from Pomerol, a 2016 Chateau Beauregard. Here you can see the dominance of the Merlot grape on the right bank. This again, remember, is clay soil. Merlot likes cool and clay. You can see the status of Pomerol wines with the price at $72 a bottle for Chateau Beauregard. Also, the property behind Pomerol, one property away for one AOC off the river, Lalande de Pomerol, 70% Merlot at $27. So again, two wines available in our system from the left bank or the right bank of Bordeaux. Now, I did want to highlight probably the most famous wine from Pomerol, Chateau Pétrus. Chateau Pétrus is been identified as one of the most expensive wines in the world. It's been made since 1837. And one of the reasons why they believe it to be so good and so excellent is because there's only 28 acres of vineyard land, which exist on a 40-meter elevation buttonhole or a mound located on the right bank of the Bordeaux. This mound of soil is made up of primarily this iron-rich blue clay, pictured there on the right. As you get closer to the surface of the soil, you get some of that blue clay mixed in with some of the organic matter. But it is believed that this buttonhole or mound in Pomerol is responsible for the high quality of wine known as Chateau Pétrus. The wines are 100% Merlot, which is interesting because, again, Merlot does not have a grand reputation at least in our country. It doesn't have a grand reputation, but this is the most expensive wine in the world, 100% Merlot. Relatively old vines at 45 years, all hand harvested. They're only making 30,000 bottles a year with 12 to 16 months spent on new oak. Looking online, the average price of a 2014, or excuse me, I did find a bottle of a 2014 Pétrus at $3,200 a bottle. And the average price is apparently around $2,600 a bottle. So again, you can see if you're interested in a Pétrus, you're going to pay dearly for it. Pétrus, of course, became extremely popular in our country back in the 60s when Aristotle Onassis was frequenting the restaurant La Pavilion in New York, which was serving Pétrus wine. And it's there that, again, wines of the rich and famous become very popular and very expensive. But that's what made Pétrus very popular in our country. Most recently, as you might have read, a case of Pétrus has made it into space. Most recently, this wine, Pétrus, a case of Pétrus, came back from the International Space Station. They sent 12 bottles of the 2000 vintage up to the International Space Station, where it was aged for 14 months. Those bottles have now been returned to Earth. Some have been handed over to Christie's auction house, where they anticipate that these bottles coming back from space will be auctioned off at probably around $1 million per bottle, clearly making it the most expensive wine ever. Some of the early results have identified the taste of the space wine as being more floral and slightly darker than bottles of the 2000 vintage that have remained on Earth. The pictures you see there, by the way, are some of the canisters that were used to transport the wine back and forth into space. Moving to another part of the right bank, here is Saint-Emilion. Again, by the Saint-Emilion rating system, these are both identified as Grand Crus. You can see a fairly reasonable price for these wines. They are both Merlot dominant, and again, with some Cab Franc and Cab Sauv blends. That's one of the classic things to do when you're asking about Bordeaux wines, no matter whether it's left bank or right bank. Whenever someone buys a Bordeaux wine, they always kind of know what's the blend. And because for some reason that makes a big difference. Merlot tends to be a little bit softer on the palate than the Cabernet. And again, the Bordeaux blends are very popular for that reason. Here in our country, just to give you an idea as to how popular Bordeaux wines have become, Back in 1988, in an attempt to mimic Bordeaux blends, a group of winemakers got together to make wines in the Bordeaux style, and they collectively organized to create the Meritage Alliance, which is simply meant to mimic some of those Bordeaux blends. So if you buy a bottle of wine in our country and it's labeled as a Meritage, the winemakers should have belonged to the Meritage Alliance. The wines are required in order to belong to the Alliance. You have to make your wines from the traditional noble Bordeaux varieties. And you are also, your dues for belonging to the Alliance include a $1 per case fee up to a $500 cap back to the Alliance for the use of the name Meritage. Incidentally, the word Meritage comes from the word merit, which refers to the noble grapes, and the heritage, which refers to the history of the Bordeaux region. So together, Meritage is how the word is pronounced. Again, those are all the classic Bordeaux red grapes and white grapes that are allowed to be used under the Meritage Alliance rules. You have to use at least 2 of the traditional grapes, and no one grape can exceed 90% of the blend. I did find on the Meritage website that there are this list of Pennsylvania wineries. You may recognize several of them. Pennsylvania wineries that are members of the Meritage Alliance and most likely are making a Meritage wine. Now, in addition to our country, Italy has also attempted to mimic Bordeaux wines, recognizing that they were constrained by their regulations. In 1968, Tenuta San Guido and Antinori both created a Bordeaux-style blends with the Sangiovese grape to create what we now call today Super Tuscans. And again, you can see how you can see the success story that Super Tuscans represent just based on the pricing of the wines. They're excellent wines. But again, this was an attempt to mimic the blends out of Bordeaux. Both of these examples just highlight how popular the Bordeaux wines are and how other places are trying to mimic or recreate the Bordeaux flavors within their wines. The white grapes of Bordeaux, we mentioned already, are Sauv Blanc, Muscadel, and Semillon, with Semillon being the most popular, Sauv Blanc #2, and Muscadel more of a minor player. These grapes are predominantly making these white Bordeaux wines, but the most popular wines are those affected by the botrytis bacteria, or the botrytis mold, I should say, the fungus, and as botrytis known as the noble rot, or otherwise the gray mold. The image at the bottom is kind of just showing you how that mold affects the grapes over the course of time. You can see how the grape starts out nice, ripe, plump, and juicy, and the mold dehydrates the grapes, concentrating the sugars. Entre-Deux-Mers is the place in Bordeaux that is most notable for the white Bordeaux wines. Here's a couple of examples of a white Bordeaux from Entre-Deux-Mers. You can see the dominance of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. The wine on the right, the Moulin de Launay, I really couldn't find the blend breakdown. It does say that it's made of Semillon and Muscadel, but that's as much as I can find out about that particular wine. But those are 2 wines from Entre-Deux-Mers, or white Bordeaux's, that I found in our systems. The more popular wine out of Bordeaux is the Sauternes. This is one example of the Sauterne. Again, in the classification system, this is a Premier Grand Cru Class A, which means it's not the top, but it's next to the top. It's the second in line. 2005 Chateau Guiraud, which is rated, by the way, as a Wine Spectator 97. This is only a half bottle. It's 375 milliliters, but you can see at that price, $28, this is an excellent bottle of wine. 65% Semillon Dominant, 35% Sauvignon Blanc, 18 to 24 months in barrel. A classic pairing, by the way, of Sauternes is a Roquefort cheese, which is also made in that same region of France. Roquefort being a sheep's milk cheese, it is also a protected appellation in France. In other words, its origins are protected. So to be called Roquefort, it should be coming from Roquefort, France. Anyway, I think this is an outstanding value. I don't have a bottle of this yet, but I'm certainly going to be looking for it. An excellent dessert wine. It's going to be a very sweet wine, but is also going to be outstanding. For most of you, the most famous Sauternes wine is Chateau d'Yquem. Chateau d'Yquem has been around for a long time, since 1593. They only make 10,000 bottles a year. This particular vintage, the 2016, is 25% Sauv Blanc, 75% Semillon, aged in barrel for 3.5 years. Its residual sugar is at 120 to 140 grams per liter. And just for comparison's sake, a cola, a regular soft drink, sugar levels is about 109 grams per liter. So again, this wine is very sweet. Nonetheless, you can see the price at $549 or $550 a bottle. It is very well known. It has a very big history, and it is also very expensive. Incidentally, if you're looking for that perfect Christmas gift, you can buy a Nebuchadnezzar, which is a 15-liter bottle of Chateau d'Yquem at a price tag of anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. I listed some of the many taste descriptors that I found for this particular wine, all of which sound very enticing. Coconut, honeysuckle, peach, pear, plum, apple, orange blossom, mango, pineapple, vanilla, apricot, all of which sound very attractive to me. Now, just to go back one, here's a Chateau Guiraud at $28 for half a bottle, a Wine Spectator 97. I've only tasted Chateau d'Yquem once. It's a Wine Spectator 94 at $550. If anything, you'll know what's on my table. Chateau d'Yquem goes back many years, obviously. This was one of the favorite wines of our third president, Thomas Jefferson. He actually wrote about Chateau d'Yquem as the best white wine of France, and the best of it is made by Monsieur de l'Oursolus. That was the words of Thomas Jefferson. Now, historically speaking, it's believed that when the wines were made in the 1800s, the wines were more dry and less of the super sweet Sauternes that we're familiar with. But at the same time, it was good enough that Thomas Jefferson ordered 360 bottles for both him, and he was going to give some to our president at the time, Thomas Jefferson. In May of 1787, our third president did travel through the Bordeaux region, where he would have had an opportunity to taste these wines. You can visit the building where he would have stayed. At the time, it was called L'Hôtel Richelieu. And there's the building as it stands today, but it is no longer a hotel. It is now a hamburger joint, but I'm sure the president would have certainly enjoyed a burger in the restaurant had they served them at the time. Another example, the Tsar Alexander I of Russia had also paid a healthy price for some of the same Sauternes wine. And although I haven't validated the story, apparently some Chateau d'Yquem wine had made it into space in the 1980s with a French astronaut. Let's see, what else do I want to say about Chateau Sauternes? Today, they're owned not wholly owned, but mostly owned by LVMH, Louis Vuitton. Moet Hennessy owns most of the Chateau today. Here is some of the cuisine of Bordeaux. Again, recognizing that it is an estuary, it's close to the ocean. Oysters and seafood become popular. With some of those rich Bordeaux wines, as you might guess, duck becomes a popular dish. duck on the rivers, as well as beef and with a Bordelaise sauce, referring directly to Bordeaux. Here in our country, we know cab and a slab to be a great pairing, and Bordeaux wines would go great with a steak. Also in the Bordeaux region, popular dishes include their version of a seafood stew, poisson à la rouille, white asparagus, mushrooms again become popular in the region, as well as foie gras, which is extremely popular along the Dordogne River. I believe you can actually visit the farms where foie gras is made and visit and see how the geese are fed, force-fed basically, to produce large livers to make the foie gras. And of course, as you might guess, being a river, sturgeon would be a popular fish on the rivers, and caviar with a nice Bordeaux sounds like a great pairing to me. In the dessert realm, when we get to the sauternes in the lower left-hand corner, the dune blanche, basically a cream puff that is popular in the Bordeaux region. But the more popular dessert in the center, in the bottom center, is the quenelles de Bordeaux. These particular pastries are made with 100% egg yolks. For those of you that may make wine at home, you may know that egg whites are used to filter out or to fine the wines. Egg whites are blended into the wine to help all of the sediment. The protein in the egg whites helps all the sediment in wine fall to the bottom of the container. So what do you do when you've used up all the egg whites for fining your wine? You have all these egg yolks left over. You make quenelles out of them, a delicious egg yolk rich dessert. So quenelles would be a great wine to pair with a sauterne wine. The creme brulee is also a popular dessert, as are macarons out of Saint-Emilion. And overall, if you're looking for a great Bordeaux pairing of either white Bordeaux or red Bordeaux, you got plenty of options and a lot of good stuff there on the page. So if you don't want your trip to end, you can get out of your rental car. Some of you may have actually made the trip. There are river cruises in the Bordeaux region. They typically begin in Bordeaux. They go up and down the rivers, visiting wineries and the local villages along the way. So if you don't want your trip to end, you can book yourself a river cruise in Bordeaux and continue to enjoy the cuisine and the wines of the area. Other than that, to put a summary on it, we've covered the Loire Valley, Pie-Nantais, Anjou-Saumur, Touraine, and the Upper Loire, and the regions around Bordeaux, the left bank, the right bank, Entre-deux-Mers, and overall, we're ready to head home after a long, well worth trip. I would end my presentation today with this one last slide. Many people over the course of time ask me, what's my favorite wine? I, in turn, come back with 4 additional questions for them. What's for dinner? Who am I with? What's the occasion? And most importantly, what wine are you pouring? Will certainly be my favorite wine. Always remember, you decide what wine you like the best. With that, there's my references and sources of information for all the things that you heard today. And with that, Marty, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. We're going to open up the mics in a few minutes here. First, I want to again remind you that this episode of our virtual wine tasting series has been presented on behalf of the Pennsylvania Wine Society. And I urge you to check out our website at pawinesociety.org and check out if you're not a member already, check out the options as far as membership and sign up for our newsletter. And you can certainly make a monetary donation if you wish. And now, if Kevin, if you want to take down this slide. Oh, by the way, if you have any other questions about anything pertaining to this or to the Pennsylvania Wine Society, you can please contact me, Marty Cook, at marty@bcme.net. And now, if you can feel free to unmute your microphones. I'm sure there's got to be some questions out there. I've got some, by the way, some comments. Kevin coming in. Thanks so much for a great presentation. Cindy's got to leave us, and wishes everybody a great evening, and several other people thanking you. So go ahead with your questions, folks.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Joe.
Good job, man.
Thank
I have
you.
no questions. No questions. Just want to say hello.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Joe.
That was it, Joe?
Wow, I'm sorry, man. Well, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, we could talk French wine. Well, my favorite. We could talk French wine like all day. So
I would say, unfortunately, and Joe, to your point, we could have spent an entire afternoon on any one of these regions.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
nothing else. My whole goal here is to entice you to go explore, find some of these wines, sample them, see what you can locate, taste through them, enjoy them. But it's an adventure. It's like, if you've been housed if you've been in your house for the last 14 months with a pandemic, boy, you can travel through wine. It's a lovely, lovely place to visit.
Well, the one thing, if I could add to the French wine thing, I kind of started, I think, with, sweeter wines, probably evolving maybe into a lot of the domestic wines, certainly with California. And then I started tasting Cabernets and Merlots from Bordeaux. And to me, it was all about the balance. Having tasted my share from Australia, California, warmer climates, 14, 15% wines that just tend to be a little out of whack sometimes. Bordeaux, man, I could spend all day there. And it's like, wow, they knew what they were doing. Go figure. So,
By the way,
passion I have.
By the way, we have a question from Laura, who, if you notice a picture of a couple individuals in a car traveling across the United States towards Pennsylvania, that's Laura and Debbie. And Laura has a question. She would like to know what the benefits of using cement tanks would be.
Oh, excellent question. Thank you. Cement tanks are a relatively recent development. First of all, it's interesting that when you look at the construction of a cement tank, obviously they're big, obviously they're heavy, they're difficult to move around, but a lot of the cement tanks, and in fact, I think all of them, are lined with some sort of plastic or polymer coating. You don't necessarily get direct contact of the wine with the concrete itself. There is typically most likely a proprietary coating on the inside of those cement tanks. Nonetheless, one of the bigger benefits is temperature control. As you might guess, concrete does not retain heat very well, nor does it allow heat or cold in. So you can keep your wines at a relatively constant temperature. Not only that, but in the construction of the tank itself, you can also embed cooling coils around, through the cement, so that you can in turn control the temperature of the wine yourself. So the cement becomes a great insulator as well as a large storage container. Again, I don't know what the pricing is for a cement tank or an egg. There are some that say the egg-shaped cement tanks have some of that biodynamic advantage to them. But at the same time, again, I would say try some wines that have been aged and fermented in cement. See what you think. See if you can pick up any of those, any flavor profiles as a result. Okay. Generally speaking, cement tanks should produce wines that are more neutral, but because of the bulk aging and the bulk storage, you probably do get some flavor influences.
Some of them are also underground, aren't they?
Yes, they are. For the same reason, you get a lot of good insulation underground. The ground is always at a constant temperature. back in the not the United States state of Georgia, but back in Georgia in the Middle Eastern part of the world, the Kevri, or the kind of the terracotta cement tank equivalent, that were all buried underground for the same reason, for temperature control.
Yeah, remember, stainless steel wasn't around, so
right. Right. So overall, again, it's kind of a vintner's choice. Again, cost-wise, I really don't know what the pricing is for a stainless steel tank versus a cement tank, but I don't know. I think I'd much rather deal with a stainless steel tank just to get it in and out of the winery, if nothing else.
Yeah, they were using those red clay amphoras since Grecian days and Roman days.
Yep, that's all they had.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Averill, you're a big fan of French wine. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Or something.
Yeah. Gary Slobodian, by the way, is quite a lineup of tasting quite a lineup of wines today. Maybe we could get him to tell us a little bit of he I think has 6 different wines from these areas.
Wow.
I know he's there. Well, maybe not.
He's muted.
He's muted, and now he's unmuted.
Good afternoon, folks. Yeah, we had a Vouvray, a Sancerre, Saint-Emilion, which we actually bought when we were there about 3 years ago, and then a Sauterne that we ended up with. Later tonight, we're going to probably go with the Chateau de Pressac, which was, according to the label, Grand Cru Classé from Saint-Emilion, with our beef bourguignon that I made earlier today. Okay, I know it's not the right region, but that's what I'm doing.
They go well together. That's fine.
And your address is what? All right.
120.
By the way, Laura and Debbie, you're not drinking while you're driving, right? No.
But it
All
was
right.
most entertaining when they were getting set up.
Yeah, they were. They're somewhere west of St. Louis right now. So I hope you make it to Western PA by nightfall. But anyway. Okay. Any other questions? Jim Lang, any questions before you go to watch a baseball game? He's probably gonna, yeah, he wants to go watch the Giants lose to the Pirates again.
What's the next one, Marty?
The next one is Joe Villa. Do you want to?
Oh, I really didn't know that. It's because we're still like a month out. So
I believe it's Joe Villa, isn't it?
really, I don't know the calendar, man. I thought you did.
I should really have that with me.
Yeah, well, you're the boss.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I would never say that, but anyway. So
well, anyway, if it is me, I mean, I really wasn't trying to make a plug, but yeah, we're going to be doing Washington State. There are a lot of AVA updates to Washington State. I'm excited. I like talking about floods and soils and all that stuff, but without getting too dramatic. It should be an entertaining show for what, an hour and a half, 2 hours. How long is it going to run, Marty?
As long as you want to.
And we may have the owner of Leah Cole Winery attending Marty Club. I know Marty, and depending on winery duties, he may be tapping in to say hello to everyone. Marty is one of the people really instrumental from like 1983 on in the AVA development in Washington. He wanted to do the seminar. I said, well, you take my job away, Marty. So, I mean, he's a really cool guy, and that's really what he does. So, anyway, hopefully y'all tap in. And there are some recommended wines, though, specifically, and they are limited, but in our specialty stores. And or you can even have them mail ordered, I think, from Washington State, Leocal Winery Direct. Go figure. These are all things we can discuss here for PA coming in the future. Yeah, anyway.
Okay, so yeah, we have that coming up. And I think the next one after that is about kava, right?
Oh, who's doing that one?
Some guy named Joe Villa.
Oh, me again, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there will be cava. If you guys like sparkling wine from Spain, again, there are so many new law updates happening. The world is like spinning here. I can't keep up with this stuff. But if you like, again, sparkling wine from Spain, the choices might be limited, but I'm saying there's a lot to be learned. That if you're going out there shopping for wine, sparkling wine, you don't have a champagne budget like me. I'm a cheap Joe. Cava often will fill that bill. So kind of stay on board even for that one. Should be kind of fun. So
I have a comment from Jim Lang to Kevin. He says he learned a lot again from you today, Kevin. Thank you, and he will email you separately later. When he does, give him a little needle because he is a Giants fan. Kevin and I are Pirates fans.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're down to about 8 people, counting Kevin and
Yeah.
myself. So I think it's
Good night,
probably
guys.
time we hang it up.
Thanks, Kevin.
See you this Wednesday on Wine Wednesday, 7 o'clock, and we're doing South Africa. Ha! So beat it.
You're not going to throw any pinotage in there, are you?
I knew that was coming.
Anyway, yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, good seeing everybody.
Bye-bye.
Talk to everybody soon. Good night.